Ma'am, we need to see your documentation. Step away from the vehicle.
I'm a surgeon. I'm on my way to the hospital for an emergency procedure. Can this wait?
No, it can't wait. Where were you born?
I was born in Philadelphia. I'm running late for surgery. A patient is waiting for
Doc,
me.
just cooperate. We'll make it quick.
Dr. Aisha Williams had performed over 3,000 surgeries in her 15-year career as a cardiothoracic surgeon, but she'd never experienced the kind of life-or-death urgency that came with being stopped by federal agents while a 12-year-old boy waited on an operating table for the valve replacement that would save his life. The February morning was brutally cold despite the bright sunshine. Snow from yesterday's storm still piled along the Chicago streets, and Aisha stood shivering in her surgical scrubs outside her Subaru while 3 ICE agents demanded proof she belonged in the country where she'd been born, educated, and had dedicated her life to healing. Her pager kept buzzing. The OR team wondering where she was, the anesthesiologist asking for her ETA, the family growing more anxious with each passing minute, but the agents didn't care about any of that. They only cared about an anonymous tip that had led them to a black woman in medical scrubs, and they were determined to verify her citizenship status regardless of who might die waiting. The body cameras captured everything: the cold, the fear, the brilliant morning sunlight reflecting off snow-covered pavement, the absurdity of demanding papers from a doctor trying to save a child's life. This is how a routine drive to work became an $8.8 million lawsuit that would expose how easily federal power could be weaponized against citizens whose only crime was not looking like someone's idea of American. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Dr. Aisha Williams had always moved with purpose, a trait developed during her surgical residency at Johns Hopkins where every second mattered, where hesitation could mean the difference between a patient living or dying. At 41, she was one of Chicago Memorial Hospital's most respected cardiothoracic surgeons, specializing in pediatric cases that other surgeons considered too risky or complex. She performed her first solo heart surgery at 32, had published research that changed protocols for treating congenital defects, and had a reputation for taking cases other doctors turned away. Her parents had been school teachers in Philadelphia, both of them emphasizing education as the path to everything. They'd sacrificed to send Aisha to private schools, had celebrated when she got into Princeton, had cried with pride at her medical school graduation. Her father had passed away during her residency, but her mother still lived in Philadelphia and kept a scrapbook of every article written about her daughter, every award, every life saved. Aisha lived alone in a condo in Lincoln Park, her life structured around the hospital and the constant demands of being a surgeon. She didn't have time for much else: no spouse, no children of her own, though she joked that she had hundreds of children if you counted her patients. She ran every morning when she wasn't on call, kept her Subaru Outback meticulously maintained, and had a routine that rarely varied: wake at 5 a.m., run, shower, drive to the hospital by 6:30 a.m. for morning rounds. But February 14, 2024 wasn't a normal morning. She'd been called at 6:45 a.m. about an emergency case. 12-year-old Marcus Patterson needed an urgent valve replacement after his congenital defect had suddenly deteriorated. The surgery couldn't wait. Every hour increased the risk of cardiac failure. Aisha had cut her run short, thrown on her scrubs at home to save time at the hospital, grabbed her badge and keys, and headed out into a Chicago winter morning that was viciously cold even by local standards, though the sun was already climbing above the horizon. The temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill well below zero, though the bright morning sun made the snow-covered streets sparkle like diamonds. Yesterday's snowstorm had dumped 6 inches across the city, and while the main roads were plowed, side streets remained treacherous with ice beneath the snow. Aisha's breath created clouds in the frigid air as she started her car at 8:15 a.m., letting it warm for a few minutes while she scraped ice from the windows, squinting against the sunlight reflecting brilliantly off the fresh snow. She was wearing her surgical scrubs, burgundy top and pants from the hospital's cardiac surgery unit, with her winter coat thrown over them, her hospital ID badge clipped to the scrub top. Her hair was pulled back in the practical bun she always wore in the OR. She looked exactly like what she was: a surgeon rushing to save a life. The drive to Chicago Memorial normally took 25 minutes, but with the snow and ice, Aisha gave herself 40 minutes. She was making good time, navigating carefully through streets where other drivers were slipping and sliding, the morning rush hour in full swing with commuters heading to work under the clear blue sky. She noticed her gas gauge showing nearly empty. She'd meant to fill up yesterday, but the snow had changed her plans. With the surgery scheduled for 9:30 a.m., she had just enough time to stop for gas without being late. She pulled into a BP station on West Madison Street at 8:52 a.m., the bright morning sun already well above the horizon, casting sharp shadows across the snow-covered parking lot. The station security cameras recorded her arrival. A Subaru Outback pulling up to Pump 7, a black woman in scrubs getting out, her breath visible in the freezing air, her face illuminated by the clear morning light. Aisha swiped her credit card at the pump, started filling her tank, and was checking her phone for updates from the hospital when a black Ford Expedition pulled in behind her vehicle, blocking her exit. 3 people emerged wearing heavy tactical jackets marked IC in yellow letters. Lead Agent Christopher Wade approached first, his partners Angela Martinez and Robert Chen flanking. All 3 had body cameras active, recording from different angles in the bright morning sunlight. "Ma'am, we need to see your documentation," Wade said without preamble, without any greeting or explanation. "Step away from the vehicle." Aisha looked up from her phone, confused. The February wind cut through her thin scrub top despite her coat, her hands already going numb from the cold despite the brilliant sunshine warming the air ever so slightly. "I'm a surgeon. I'm on my way to the hospital for an emergency procedure. Can this wait?" "No, it can't wait," Wade said, moving closer. Martinez's body camera captured Aisha's face in the clear morning light, confusion giving way to concern, then to something harder. "Where were you born?" The absurdity of the question, asked at a gas station at 9 in the morning while she stood in surgical scrubs under a bright winter sun, took a moment to process. "I was born in Philadelphia. I'm running late for surgery. A patient is waiting for me. A child is waiting for me." Should federal agents be allowed to detain healthcare workers on their way to emergency procedures? Comment below, because what happened at this gas station reveals how easily enforcement priorities can override common sense and basic humanity. "We'll need proof of that," Wade said, his breath also creating clouds in the frigid air, visible against the bright morning sky. "Birth certificate, passport, naturalization papers." "Those are at home," Aisha said, her pager buzzing again. She glanced at it, or asking for her ETA marked urgent. "I'm in scrubs. I'm clearly heading to work at a hospital. Please, someone could die if I'm delayed." Chin spoke up, his body camera recording from a different angle, the morning sun glinting off his badge. "Ma'am, we've received information that you may not be legally present in this country. We need to verify your status." "Information?" Aisha's voice rose with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What information? I'm a surgeon at Chicago Memorial. I've worked there for 12 years. I have my hospital ID right here." She pulled her badge from under her coat, the laminated card showing her photo, her name, her title. Aisha Williams, MD, Cardiothoracic Surgery. Wade barely looked at it. "Hospital IDs can be faked. We need government-issued documentation proving citizenship." The gas pump clicked off behind her, the tank full, but Aisha was focused entirely on the agents who were somehow deciding that her citizenship status was more important than the child waiting for surgery. "My driver's license is in my car. My medical license is registered with the state of Illinois. My credentials are verified by the American Board of Thoracic Surgery. I can give you a dozen ways to verify who I am and what I do, but I need to get to the hospital. Now." Martinez moved to Aisha's right, positioning herself in a way that Aisha recognized as tactical containment. She was being surrounded, treated as a flight risk, all captured in sharp detail by the bright morning light. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, you'll be detained. It's that simple." "Detained?" Aisha's voice cracked with stress and cold. "I'm a surgeon. I have a 12-year-old patient in pre-op waiting for a valve replacement. His heart is failing. Every minute I'm delayed increases the risk of permanent damage or death. Do you understand what you're doing?" "We're enforcing federal immigration law," Wade said, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "Turn around and place your hands on your vehicle." The security camera captured what happened next in brilliant morning clarity, Aisha looking between the 3 agents, realization dawning that they were serious, that they were actually going to detain her despite the scrubs, despite the hospital ID, despite the medical emergency she'd explained 3 times. Her pager buzzed again. She pulled it out to check, a message from the OR, "Patient's vitals declining. Where are you?" "Please," Aisha said, her professional composure fracturing. "Call the hospital. Call Chicago Memorial. Ask for Dr. Patterson in cardiothoracic surgery. He'll verify everything. But please let me go. A child is dying." "Ma'am, turn around. Hands on the vehicle." "Last warning," Wade said. Aisha's hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline as she slowly turned and placed them on her Subaru's cold hood. The metal was freezing even through her gloves. Her scrubs provided almost no protection from the wind, her coat hanging open, the February cold cutting through to her bones despite the sunlight streaming down. Wade pulled out handcuffs. Martinez's body camera captured Aisha's face in profile in the harsh morning light, tears starting to freeze on her cheeks, her breathing rapid, her words coming out in clouds of vapor. "I'm a doctor. I'm trying to save a child's life. Please don't do this." But Wade was already pulling her arms behind her back, the handcuffs clicking shut, the metal somehow even colder than the air. Chen's body camera recorded Aisha's pager falling from her pocket onto the snow-covered ground, the screen still showing urgent messages from the hospital, everything visible in the clear daylight. "You're being detained for verification of immigration status," Wade said, beginning to recite information about her rights in the monotone of someone who had done this hundreds of times. "I'm an American citizen." Aisha's voice rose to a shout that echoed across the gas station parking lot, drawing the attention of multiple commuters filling their tanks in the busy morning rush. "I was born in Philadelphia. I went to Princeton. I went to medical school at Penn. I'm a board-certified surgeon. And there's a child on an operating table who needs me. What part of this don't you understand?" Other customers at the gas station had stopped to watch, several pulling out phones to record, the bright morning making everything clearly visible. A man in a pickup truck called out, "Hey, she said she's a doctor. Let her go." A woman at the next pump shouted, "This is wrong." But the agents ignored them, walking Aisha to their expedition in full view of the growing crowd, guiding her into the back seat despite her protests. Inside the vehicle, separated from the agents by a metal barrier, Aisha sat with her hands cuffed behind her back, her scrubs already soaked with melted snow, her body shivering uncontrollably from cold and shock. Martinez's body camera, recording from the front seat, captured Aisha's face through the barrier in the harsh light flooding through the windows, the tears, the disbelief, the desperate concern for a patient she couldn't reach. "Please," she said again, her voice barely audible over the vehicle's heater. "Call the hospital. A child is going to die because of this. Please." "We'll verify everything at the detention facility," Wade said from the driver's seat, pulling out of the gas station into the mid-morning traffic. Aisha's Subaru remained at Pump 7, still running, gas cap hanging loose, her medical bag visible through the window in the bright sunlight. The drive to the ICE detention center took 45 minutes through morning rush hour traffic made worse by yesterday's snow. Every minute that passed was a minute Marcus Patterson's heart struggled, a minute his cardiac function deteriorated, a minute closer to potential catastrophe. Aisha's mind cycled through the surgical plan she'd developed, the risks, the backups, wondering who they'd call to replace her, whether whoever stepped in would know Marcus's specific anatomical variations. At the detention center they processed her like any other detainee. Fingerprints, hands that had performed delicate cardiac repairs, that had held beating hearts, that had saved countless lives. Photos, a mugshot of a surgeon in scrubs, her hospital ID still clipped to her shirt. Property inventory, her wallet, her phone with its dozens of missed calls from the hospital, her wedding ring that she always removed for surgery. "I need to make a phone call," Aisha said as they finished processing. "I have that right. I need to call the hospital." "You'll get your call after verification," Wade said. "After verification?" Aisha's voice was hollow with exhaustion and stress. "Verification of what?" "My name is Aisha Williams. I was born in Philadelphia on March 15, 1982. My social security number is 567-89-2341. I'm a physician licensed in Illinois. Everything about me is documented, verified, and on record." "What exactly are you verifying?" Wade didn't answer, but he did enter her information into the system. The response came back within minutes. Aisha Williams, U.S. citizen by birth, social security number issued in Pennsylvania in 1982, medical license active and in good standing with the state of Illinois, hospital privileges verified at Chicago Memorial, no criminal record, no immigration violations because she was a natural-born citizen who had never left the country except for medical conferences. Wade stared at the screen, his expression shifting from confident to uncertain. Chin, reading over his shoulder, closed his eyes briefly. They had just detained a cardiac surgeon on her way to emergency surgery, handcuffed her in freezing weather, and delayed her by over 2.5 hours based on what was obviously a false tip. At 11:17 a.m., over 2.5 hours after she'd been stopped at the gas station, Aisha was released. Wade handed her back her possessions with a stiff apology that meant nothing. "Dr. Williams, there appears to have been an error. You're free to go." An error? Aisha's voice was quiet but carried more weight than any shout. I told you I was a surgeon. I told you I had an emergency. I showed you my hospital ID. I gave you multiple ways to verify my identity. And you handcuffed me, detained me, made me sit in a freezing vehicle for 45 minutes while a child waited for surgery. That's not an error. That's a choice you made. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and immediately called the hospital. Dr. Patterson answered on the first ring. Aisha, where the hell are you? We had to bring in Davidson to do the valve replacement. He's in there now, but... How's Marcus? Aisha interrupted. He crashed about 40 minutes ago. We got him back, but it was close. Too close. What happened to you? I was detained by ICE, Aisha said, the words sounding surreal even as she spoke them. At a gas station. They thought I was undocumented. Silence on the other end, then Patterson's voice, low and furious. They did what? The hospital sent a car to pick her up. By the time Aisha arrived at Chicago Memorial at 12:45 p.m., she'd been awake for over 6 hours, detained for 2.5 of them, and was emotionally and physically exhausted. She changed out of her now dry scrubs, they'd been soaked with melted snow and sweat, and went directly to the cardiac ICU where Marcus Patterson was recovering from surgery. The boy was stable, the valve replacement successful, but it had been complicated by the delay. He'd gone into cardiac arrest while waiting, requiring emergency measures that could have been avoided if his surgery had started on time. His parents, sitting beside his bed, looked at Aisha with a mixture of relief and confusion. Dr. Williams, we were told you couldn't make it, Marcus's mother said. We were so scared when they brought in a different doctor. Aisha sat down heavily in a chair, her body finally giving in to the stress. I was stopped by federal agents. They detained me on my way here. I'm so sorry. If I could have been here if they'd just listened. She broke down then, the professional composure that had sustained her through medical school, residency, and 15 years of high-pressure surgery finally cracking. The Pattersons looked shocked, not sure how to respond to their usually unflappable surgeon crying in their son's ICU room. But Aisha wasn't just crying about the detention. She was crying about the knowledge that her credentials, her education, her life's work had meant nothing to agents who saw her skin color and decided she didn't belong. She was crying about a child who had nearly died because of that assumption. And she was crying because she knew this wasn't over. Within a week, she'd retained attorney Victoria Chin, a civil rights lawyer who specialized in federal overreach cases. The lawsuit they filed was comprehensive. Dr. Aisha Williams versus United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Agent Christopher Wade, Agent Angela Martinez, Agent Robert Chin. The complaint alleged violation of Fourth Amendment rights, false imprisonment, racial profiling, interference with emergency medical care, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The evidence was overwhelming. The gas station security footage showed Aisha in scrubs, clearly identifiable as medical personnel in the bright morning light, being detained despite her explanations. The agent's own body cameras recorded her repeatedly stating she was a surgeon with an emergency, showing her hospital ID, offering multiple ways to verify her identity. Hospital records showed Marcus Patterson's surgery delay and subsequent cardiac arrest. Cell phone records showed dozens of calls from Chicago Memorial trying to reach Aisha during her detention. Most damaging was the anonymous tip that had triggered the stop. Under discovery, ICE was forced to produce it. An anonymous caller had reported seeing a suspicious foreign-looking woman in medical scrubs near the hospital, claiming she might be using fake credentials. No name, no specific evidence, just racial stereotyping that federal agents had acted on without any verification. The case went to trial 16 months after the incident. The federal courthouse was packed with physicians, nurses, medical students, and civil rights advocates who saw Aisha's case as emblematic of how easily racism could endanger lives. Aisha testified for 2 days, describing her education, her career, her dedication to saving lives. She described the detention in detail, the cold, the handcuffs, the bright morning sunlight that made everything visible to dozens of witnesses, the helpless feeling of being restrained while knowing a child was waiting for surgery. She described arriving at the hospital to learn Marcus had crashed, the knowledge that her delay had nearly killed him. I became a surgeon to save lives, she told the jury, her voice breaking. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And federal agents decided that verifying my citizenship status was more important than a child's life. They had my hospital ID. They had my offer to verify through the hospital. They had me standing in front of them in surgical scrubs at 9 in the morning under a bright winter sun, clearly heading to work with multiple witnesses watching. None of it mattered because I didn't look like their idea of American. Marcus Patterson's parents testified about the terror of watching their son code while waiting for a surgeon who was being detained at a gas station. Dr. Patterson testified about the complications caused by the delay, the additional risks Marcus had faced. Hospital administrators testified about Aisha's exemplary record, her reputation as one of the finest pediatric cardiac surgeons in the region. Constitutional law experts testified about the Fourth Amendment violations, the lack of probable cause, the illegal detention. Medical ethics experts testified about the sacred duty healthcare workers have to their patients and how the agents' actions had interfered with that duty in ways that endangered a life. The defense tried to argue the agents had been following protocol, responding to a tip in good faith. The argument collapsed under the weight of the body camera evidence showing Aisha explaining repeatedly who she was and what the emergency was, only to be ignored. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous: guilty on all counts. The damages award reflected both the violation and the danger. $8.8 million total. $3.3 million in compensatory damages for false imprisonment, emotional distress, and violation of constitutional rights. $5.5 million in punitive damages, calculated to send a message that detaining healthcare workers on the way to emergencies would carry severe consequences. Aisha sat quietly as the verdict was read, her mother beside her having flown in from Philadelphia, colleagues from the hospital filling the rows behind her. When the amount was announced, she didn't celebrate. She thought about Marcus Patterson, about how close he'd come to dying, about how many other patients might be endangered if this kind of profiling continued. All 3 agents were terminated and faced federal charges. ICE announced policy changes: prohibition on detaining healthcare workers in scrubs or with medical identification without supervisory approval, requirements to verify tips before enforcement action, accountability for delays that endanger public safety. Aisha used part of her settlement to establish a fund providing legal assistance to healthcare workers facing discrimination and to support medical education for underserved communities. She continued practicing at Chicago Memorial, though she now carried multiple forms of ID and has the hospital's legal team on speed dial. The body camera footage became required viewing in medical schools and civil rights training, a stark reminder that assumptions about who belongs can override common sense and endanger innocent lives. And in Chicago, Dr. Aisha Williams still performs surgery, still saves lives, but never forgets the February morning when her scrubs and credentials meant nothing because federal agents decided her skin color made her suspicious, even under the bright light of day with dozens of witnesses watching. If you believe healthcare workers should be protected from harassment, that racial profiling endangers lives, and that saving a child should matter more than demanding papers, hit subscribe. Because Aisha's story proves that sometimes the cost of bias isn't just money, it's measured in the heartbeats of children waiting for surgeons who never arrive.